Let me join the chair and the ranking member in saluting you, Secretary Kerry, for your service. While I may have disagreements at times on policy, I never doubt your commitment to America's virtues and promoting those virtues abroad. And let me make a comment or two, which I did not intend in my preparation today. I guess it's the political hunting season, but if you keep shooting and you don't land anything, maybe there's nothing to shoot at. And I think the global needs that we have, we'd be far better off with the State Department focused on that. And on Cuba, I would just say to my dear friend from California, I wish he was here, that human rights and democracy are never about the past. They are eternal from my perspective. And yet, all I can say is that there's a difference between the president traveling to Cuba and when he traveled to Burma, for example. When he traveled to Burma, we had Aung San Suu Kyi released from house arrest. We had by-elections, however flawed. We had the 11 commitments to release political prisoners. We got the Red Cross access to prisons and so forth. There were concrete and tangible progress on political reform and human rights. If anything, we're going backwards here. Some of the people who were released under the original deal have already been re-arrested and are serving long terms in prison. So much for good faith. We had 1,400 arrests this year alone in the first 2 months. That's progress? 1,400 arrests. Not because I say it, but the UN Commission on, the Cuban Commission on Human Rights, which is inside of Cuba, says it. And when we do business with the Castro regime, which is what we're doing, we're not doing business with the Cuban people. We're doing with Castro's son and son-in-law, who head the two major entities by which you can do, the only way you can do business inside of Cuba, both heads of the Cuban military, both who are going to have a transitional and generational change from one set of Castros to another. So I'm going to continue to speak out on that issue because I think that human rights and democracy in Cuba is incredibly important, as I have viewed it elsewhere in the world, and I am concerned that what we've done is neutered our programs there. But let me get to the heart of what I really wanted to talk about, and that is Iran. I want to ask you, Mr. Secretary, invoking sanctions against Iranian activities unrelated to its nuclear portfolio, let's say items of proliferation of ballistic missile technology or support for terrorism, they do not violate the terms of the JCPOA, correct?
They do not what?
That pursuing actions, sanctions, and other actions on proliferation of missile technology and support for terrorism, they do not violate the terms of the JCPOA.
That's accurate.
Okay. Now, I look at what has transpired since our agreement. We have seen 2 ballistic tests in violation of UN Security Councils. We've seen missiles tested in the vicinity of U.S. naval vessels. We've seen American sailors detained. We have seen the border of 4 innocent Americans held hostage for the freedom of 21 Iranian criminals, including those convicted of conspiracy and material support to a state sponsor of terrorism, shipping sensitive dual-use technology, money, and other materials in violation of standing U.S. sanctions. We've seen clemency for another 14. We've awarded the Iranian government $1.7 billion, admittedly for some type of contractor service that we didn't provide, but that was never, ever talked about. Not when I was chairman, not when I was the ranking member, not as a member of this committee. I never heard about that at all. And it was done so quickly, and the payment was made so rapidly that even the victims of terrorism who have judgments in the United States didn't have the wherewithal to try to attach it. So I look at that, and then I see the challenges that we have with Iran outside of its nuclear portfolio. Support to a Houthi insurgency that helped topple the internationally recognized government of Yemen, support to Shia militias in Iraq that exercise profound control over the democratically elected Iraqi government, support to the Syrian regime of Assad, which is a devastating war that we all know about, financing of billions of dollars to Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas. And so I look at that, and I just don't see where the counterweight is. And I look at that and say, I have a sense we are creating a permissive environment. Why do I say that? When we look at Iran's ballistic missile launches, which violated UN Security Council resolutions, We waited an inordinate amount of time, knowing that the United Nations ultimately wasn't going to act and didn't. When we finally did provide some sanctionable action, well after all of the elements of implementation date took place, we have 11 entities that were sanctioned, but instead of sanctioning the banks that were financing those entities so that we have a more far-reaching consequence, we're playing whack-a-mole. And so we have the ability to be far more aggressive against the Iranians on those things that we care about. And I know there is this desire to try to create the space for the moderates inside of Iran, even though they were just blocked by the Guardian Council into a way in which there are virtually no moderates who are being allowed to run the legislative elections. So I look at that and I say, why is it that we aren't being far more aggressive with the tools that we have? And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce into the record a GAO report that I had commissioned with Senator Kirk.
Without objection.
And it talks about the entity which we are putting all the marbles in, the International Atomic Energy Administration. Now, I think they do good work. But let me just say that some of the preliminary findings cause concern for me about what the IAEA is capable of. So let me read some of them. GAO's preliminary observations point directly to future problems with monitoring, verifying, and meeting requirements of the JCPOA. It talks about its limitation, a limited budget from irregular funding sources, human resource shortfalls, important equipment operating at capacity already, not being able to go beyond that, limited analytical capabilities that will all be tested by the new mandates of the JCPOA, a lack of authorities. Obviously, the IAEA activities will depend to a significant degree on the cooperation of the Iranian state. Thirdly, that while they have focused virtually all of their resources to pursue the JCPOA, they're going to have very little resources. They turn away from other proliferators and potential proliferators. And finally, among other items, the IAEA's own estimates has identified the need for approximately $10 million per year for 15 years over and above its present budget. So it is an agency that is understaffed for its purposes, losing technical assistance, people are leaving, has now a singular focus, which I applaud the focus, but I want them to also pursue other proliferators, and a budget that doesn't have the wherewithal to sustain it just for the focus of the JCPOA. So shouldn't Iran, who violated international norm and international law, ultimately be the entity to pay, since they are now flush with money that we've given them or returned to them, shouldn't they be the ones to pay for the very essence of the verification and monitoring that they caused the need for in the first place?
Senator, you raised a lot, obviously. Let me just try to quickly say on Cuba. First of all, I really appreciate your personal comments, and I'm grateful for that. And I also respect enormously your commitment. You're dedicated when it comes to the issue of human rights and freedom, and you've always been very clear about it with respect to Cuba. And we have a difference maybe in the tactics about how to get there, but we don't have a difference in the goal. It's our sense that that we've already seen some improvement in empowerment of the Cuban people in the private sector, now employing 1 in 4 Cubans. It's grown significantly and is growing. And as the flights come in and more people are there, there's a transformation taking place. Anybody who's been down there and had been there previously has observed this change that's taking place. People in the United States can now send unlimited remittances in support of private business investment.
And 1,400 arrests just this year
Provide
alone.
I agree.
1,400 arrests.
It's not perfect.
I didn't really ask you for comments on Cuba, which I appreciate.
Well, I think it's important
I
to
just wanted to
put
let
it
you
in a
know,
perspective.
and for the record, how I felt. I would like responses to the question of Iran, though.
Sure. With respect to Iran, we believe we are being more than vigilant, actually. On January 17th, we designated 3 entities and 7 and 8 individuals who had provided materials for Iran's ballistic missile program. So we sanctioned people, and we cut them off from the U.S. financial system. We have continually been tracking the implementation with great impact. We had a couple of questions about one thing or another. We raised them with the Iranians, and we resolved them in a way that kept faith with exactly what should be happening. They weren't malicious. They were just normal kinds of things that had risen in the course of process, and we're happy to brief Congress. I'm sure you'll be fully briefed on every aspect of that. Yes, the IAEA does need more money. We know that. There are additional inspectors, however, under our agreement who will be in there, 130 of them. And we are, as you know, our intel community and our energy department remain absolutely clear that they have the ability to be able to verify and track this agreement. So the GAO is helpful. I think anybody's scrutiny that adds some choices for what can be done to make sure we're doing this correctly can do so. But the bottom line is we know that they took out from 19,000 centrifuges down to 5,060. We know that they took the calandria out of the plutonium reactor and destroyed it, filling it with cement, can never be used again. We know there is no enrichment taking place in Fort Howe and so forth. So
My time is over, well over, so I appreciate the Chairman's courtesy. My focus wasn't about the implementation of the JCPOA. It is about Iran's malign activities within the region that we
let me come to that. We're
So-
also extremely focused on that. I had a meeting with the GCC a few weeks ago. We're meeting again somewhere in the next few weeks. We are, I think we've plussed up our assistance in the billions of dollars in terms of sales to them for their ability to be able to push back against Iranian activities. We have engaged with the Iranians on their activities, specifically in Yemen, and we have high hopes that over the course of this Syria process, we can begin to deal with the flow of weapons that have been coming out of Iran through Damascus into Lebanon and threatening Israel. And we're very clear about that, and the threat of Hezbollah. So, and the IRGC's engagement in various ways. Now, again, some of that should be taken up in a classified session, but we believe that the amount of money that has flowed to Iran thus far, not because we have interfered with it or something, but because it just has not materialized as significantly as a lot of people alleged, is not winding up in some great imbalance in support for activities that we object to. So there are things going on that we obviously, that's why we left in place the sanctions on human rights, the sanctions on arms, the sanctions on missiles, the sanctions on state sponsor of terror are all still there, extant, and subject to enforcement. And we made that clear, which is why we did designate people because of the missile test that took place. So we're very focused on it, Senator, together with our allies, and I might add with Israel. We're constantly sharing information, and I can assure you every country in the region will be as diligent as we are in tracking what they're doing.